inspiring you to set the marketplace ablaze in partnership with an awesome and limitless God. This is the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast, and this isn't business as usual. Here's your host and Chief Fire Igniter, Shay Bynes.
Welcome back to the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. This is your host, Shay Bynes, and our goal here is to inspire you to operate your business completely yielded and in partnership with our awesome and limitless God. My guest today is Alicia Hommon, owner of the Laughing Place Bakery in Gladstone, Missouri, and one of our beloved Igniters mentors on Team KDE. I asked Alicia to come back for yet another update episode because I think it's powerful to give a glimpse of how people grow in doing business in partnership with God. We go from one level of glory to the next. And last year when she was on the show, she shared candidly about her journey and learning to walk out the grace over grind message and that life as a bakery owner. It was a multiple year process for her from the time that she heard the message and it resonated in her heart to belief that it was actually possible for her. It was such a great episode. I'll be sure to link it up in the show notes. Now, today, she gives us an update from the past 9 months and the new lessons that she has learned and is continuing to learn as she moved from the position of owner-operator of the bakery to owner of the bakery. Did you catch the shift? She had to come out of the bakery and out of the operations of the bakery. She shares, again, very honestly, the journey of how she has learned to let go of the things that she still felt she needed control. It's been another layer of surrender for her, and God has met her so beautifully in the process. I believe many of you listening will be able to relate to what she shares. And my prayer is that you'll be encouraged or maybe even convicted to surrender even more to God as well. He is trustworthy. And this is all part of experiencing His best in our lives and our businesses and having a greater kingdom impact through the work that we do. So with all of that said, I'm going to get out of the way, listen in, and enjoy this conversation I had with my dear sister, Alicia Hommon. Alicia Hommon, my dear, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm super good. I'm going to get a chance to see you pretty soon, face to face for the first time in way too long.
Yes, and I'm so excited. Excited for a long time.
I know it's been a long time coming, and Alicia Bynes is coming to work full time in the Laughing Place Bakery.
Yeah. I'm actually so excited for Anissa to come. There were moments when after it had been decided that she was going to be coming up to work in the bakery and what that looked like, I'd have moments of excitement where God would give me a vision of what that might look like. A very specific moment a year ago where God was really downloading some things to me at a business conference that I was at and at Heaven and Business. And it was really exciting. But then I've also had moments of fear, like, what if I fail this? So, just being real, but
oh my gosh.
Here's how He solves the fear. Like, you can't fail what I have my hands in. So
come on, the partnership with God. I love it. So first of all, this is your fourth time on the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. I believe that you were the only, maybe the second person to ever be on this podcast 4 times.
Well, it's the first time I don't have butterflies in my stomach, if that helps.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's good. Well, so last time you were with me on the podcast was September of last year. And before we hit record, I asked you, if you were thinking about the just kind of reflecting on the last 9 months of your business life, I asked what would the 2 top themes be? And you replied, surrender and intimacy. So I thought that we will continue this conversation. For those who don't know, first of all, Alicia is a mentor on Team KDE. Alicia goes way back in Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur history, all the way back to the very, very beginning. Alicia is also the author of the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur's Guide to Debt-Free Business. And she is now no longer the owner operator of, but she is the owner of the Laughing Place Bakery in Gladstone, Missouri. And so the last time we chatted in September, we were talking about just like this kind of great embracing that grace over grind was for you too, even as an owner operator of a bakery. It wasn't just for everybody else. It was for you too. And we explored that. And then when you told me before I hit record that surrender and intimacy were kind of the themes of the last 9 months, I was like, okay, but then what you're experiencing now is your grace over grind level 2.0. Yeah. So let's kind of talk about these one by one, just see how the conversation goes. So talk to me about the surrender walk for you, where you were maybe 9 months ago versus kind of what God's been walking with you through over these last several months.
Sure. So surrender is huge because here's the thing. If you feel like you have to be in control of something, then that thing is actually in control of you and it's your idol. So what was going on with me and what has been just honestly since the very first moment I heard you, Shabine, say the words grace over grind and start to get to see you walk through your experience of how God was teaching you to operate in his grace. There have been moments of frustration. There have been moments of tears. There just were this whole process of, I know that's something I want. I know it's something for me too, but I didn't know how to get there. And it is challenging to sit behind a desk in front of a computer all day for work. And it is different kind of challenging to stand behind a counter and have to manually do labor all day long. And so even there were times where I'm like, sure, that grace over grind thing is great for you guys, but it doesn't work for me. But still wanting that peace that I saw in your life. And so ultimately, what God has shown me over the past, really specifically in the 9 months, is that I had to let go of the thing that I thought I needed to control because it was controlling me. And that was the bakery. I felt like if I didn't have my hands on every aspect of it, that those things would fail. And God's like, no, that's not actually how this works. So that's kind of what I've been through in the last 9 months. And I went from, I had just hired a new pastry chef, I believe, when we first started talking, or it's possible she hadn't even started yet, but I just had made an offer to her, and God provided tremendously in a miraculous way for her to come and work for me. And she was a major blessing. There were many, many changes and things that happened within the bakery with her there. And also some things I learned. One thing I learned that was really big is that he gave me everything I needed already. Ultimately, that business relationship with her didn't end up working out, and so she was only with us for a short time in the grand scheme of things. But when I was like, okay, Lord, I can't go back into full time every day, all day long being in the bakery, because that was a hard fought battle for me to let go of and to step out of every day. And what's really interesting is he gave me what I thought I wanted, which was this wonderful, incredible, talented pastry chef. And we worked together for a while, and some really fantastic things came out of that relationship. But ultimately, what I thought I wanted and needed was actually not what he knew I needed. And so when that relationship ended and I had to regroup and think about how to operate within the bakery now without going back into me being there full time, God's like, I already had given you what you needed right in front of you. So look at that. And I ended up actually hiring 2 people from in-house to, or not hiring them, but giving them promotions, one to be an opening manager and one to be a closing manager. They were very young ladies who had been with me since very early on in the bakery. And, I was nervous because, of course, I saw them grow up. So I saw the bad things and the good things, how they were operating in life, right? One of them I got fired at one point and brought her back on because I wasn't equipped to raise her up past a challenge that we were having. She went into another job, came back for me as just on a here and there basis when we needed some extra help. And she had transformed into this really responsible, mature young woman. And I was like, I've got to have you back. Wow. So it's kind of that. So I offered these 2 young ladies these promotions, just a little bit scared of what might happen. And God's like, hands off, hands off, hands off. And they have done such a tremendous job in the new positions that they're in and have had new and fresh ideas. There have been some things that haven't been easy and some things that we've had to really work through, making sure that we still are doing them with excellence. But for the most part, I mean, they have covered gaps that I didn't know I had.
Wow.
So that's the surrender part of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's it's a significant surrender. Now, help me bridge a gap, because you had hired a pastry chef and then lost the pastry chef. But then the two people you just mentioned hiring were actually managers, like a day manager and a what did you call it?
And closing manager. Yeah.
A closing manager. So how did you then deal with the gap of the pastry chef that you no longer had?
So goes back to also God had showed me, and I have to kind of go back in my story to a time when I was working out of my home still. I had actually, when I was only doing cakes, I had a miscarriage at one point. And so during that, the ladies in my church responded to my need. I had, I think, 5 cakes that were due on this weekend right after I'd had a miscarriage. And so the ladies in my church came to my home and they're like, whatever we can do, let us help. And I literally sat in the side of my room, a hot mess, and gave directions. And every single cake got to where it needed to be on time with these ladies' help. And that's a God's grace and an amazing, miraculous story in and of itself. But something I learned in that was that God gave me these abilities and talents and gifts with food and baking in particular that were not, I always thought that that's how everyone was born and how everyone grew up. And I never understood that they were actually specifically a gift.
Right.
And so one of those things he also gave me a gift for is to be able to teach other people. And I just didn't realize that I had been doing that all along with the people in the bakery. So I wasn't lacking anything. I didn't need someone who had a 5-star background, because he'd already given me the gifts and talents that I needed for the vision that he gave me for the business. And so that, I mean, ultimately, had I kept the pastry chef working with me, I really believe I would have kept her from some of the things that God has for her that were even better and greater.
Wow.
Because he had already met the need for the bakery. Does that make sense?
It does. It actually makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Thank you for helping me close the gap in my mind. What was going on there?
They were already trained as pastry chefs. I'd already done that work, and I didn't even realize
it was already there.
Yeah. I just had to let go of my overwhelmingly immature control of the situation and let them actually do what I'd taught them to do.
That is super good. Okay. So you have grown and surrendered. So now, do you actually show up at all? Like, what does it look like for you in the bakery now?
So every once in a while during the week, I'll show up if there's a need, or if I just, it's not like I'm completely absent because I enjoy being there.
Right.
But I did have to have total separation for a season after I hired the 2 young ladies and promoted them, just because I couldn't be in there and not put my hands on things. But God had given me pretty clear instruction that I needed to be hands off and let things happen. Now I do, until Alicia Hommon gets here, I do still work on Saturday mornings just because we just have a little bit of a gap in labor there. And so that those 2 young ladies don't have to work. I'm not going to put someone else into grind in order that I be in grace.
Ooh,
because that's a hot mess.
You just dropped a whole something right there.
Yeah.
You're not going to put someone else in the position of grind so that you can operate in grace, because you want a grace over grind culture in your entire business. It's not just about you, but it's about everyone who surrounds you.
Right.
And supporting the vision God's given you.
I think I actually may have mentioned this in the previous podcast, the one in September, is that God had given me this moment where I was very frustrated about a situation with an employee and what was happening. And he's like, why don't you be an employee or an employer like I am? And I'm like, well, that's a little bit uncomfortable. And he's like, didn't I give you a great commission? You work for me, don't you? And I'm like, okay. So then I started looking at what kind of employer God is. And he is the kind of employer that gives his employees exceedingly abundantly more than they ask, think, or imagine and need, right? So that's a really revolutionary and scary idea as an employer to have that kind of culture in your business. And it is definitely a learning and growing experience. And there have to be, because God also gives us boundaries, right? So we also, if we're going to be that kind of generous of spirit and generous of heart and character as an employer, we also have to examine how God sets boundaries and be able to set boundaries within our business. And so it still is a working and growing experience process for me. But definitely, I want to make sure that if it's something that God has gifted me with or graced me with, that I'm also transferring that into my employees and not expecting them to. So if his burden is easy and his yoke is light, then it's also his burden is easy and his yoke is light for your employees.
That's exactly it. That's super good. So I'm curious about that. I know that's your desire for them, but everyone kind of operates in their own, for them in terms of how they show up. How do you impart that reality for them to embrace it? Are you just kind of doing it and not necessarily talking about it, or are you doing it and talking to them about, like, actually talking to them and having conversations around this culture? What does that look like for you in the bakery?
So most of it is doing, and then where I'm given opportunity, because not everybody that works for me is a believer. So I have to be sensitive in how my language works. So I express the culture, but maybe not always the specific grace language, unless I'm given an open door to have that kind of ministry with my employees.
Yes.
But some of it too is their own experience. What I'm learning is, because, as you know, Shay, I have a lot of family that works for me. 2 of my employees are my daughters. And one of them is, for all intents and purposes, my niece. So what I'm learning by observing them is how, in the name of teaching my children to have standards and to be reliable and what have you. So the thing that I hated, which was kids not having, being responsible, I went too far. And so I taught my kids how to grind, because that's the way I knew to have standards. And so with my niece and my daughters in particular, I'm having to come back and be very particular with them and say, okay, I'm so thankful that you care enough about the business now, and that I've instilled in you so much that you're willing to work at 8:30 at night when your shift got over at 5:30. But that's not something we're going to do here. Yeah. So I have one side of the business and employees who I'm having to pull them back and teach them a grace. And then I have the other side who I'm having to teach to teach from
more
the
diligence.
Other direction of it.
More diligence.
Yes. Yeah. And because here's the deal, if we don't work with excellence in the season and in the times that God is calling us to work, then we have actually put up our own gate, our own burden on grace being actual grace.
Yeah, super good.
Which is why grace is not laziness. So anyway.
Yes. Very good. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about the other aspect. So we talked about the surrender that you've kind of been working through. You also talked about how intimacy has been a theme of these last 9 months. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I think it starts with, so I said earlier today about how when you're grinding in a job and that it becomes idolatry, right? When you have to have control over something, it becomes idolatry. Well, let me just tell you, if you are wondering if you are operating in grind, if your intimacy with God has gone out the window, I guarantee you're operating grind. Because anytime we're in idolatry, we're not intimate with God. And that means that what you're doing, whether it be the work of your hands or whatever, is very likely what is your God in this moment. And so what I discovered over the last 9 months is, God had given me grace. Like he gives us these seasons of grace where he allows us to learn. And then he's like, okay, you should have learned the lesson already. I'm going to cut off this grace on this situation because it's time for you to grow up already.
Right.
And so God would give me these times where I had learning periods. And very specifically over the last 9 months, what happened is I didn't want to give up being in the bakery, although he had shown me, or he'd given me the resources to step out physically, but I didn't want to give up being there. And literally the place where I would go and have great fellowship with him, which was the bakery, and the times being alone in the bakery was fellowship with him. It was like nothing, dead silence. And I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And as soon as I stepped out, and I'm pretty much, and I mentioned that I had to be out full time for a season and have full separation for a little while. But he started, as soon as I stepped out, anytime I was out of the bakery, I'd have fellowship with him and intimacy, and I'd hear from him. And the minute I stepped back in, it'd go away.
Wow.
And because I was serving you, we can't serve two gods. So when I was serving the God that was the bakery for me, and that doesn't mean that the bakery, the business, that doesn't mean that any of that wasn't God's gift to me.
That's right.
But it had become my God. So anytime I was serving that God, I wasn't having intimacy with my real God.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Big deal.
So you're like, I'm over here in the bakery trying to enjoy my time with the Lord like I normally do. And like, it's just like, what's happening here? Where are you, Lord?
Right.
And then you step out. It's like, here I am.
Yep. And literally like my relationship with him and just my walk with him just completely stagnated during that season. And it was desperate and miserable. And I went through every sinful emotion, like emotions in and of themselves aren't sinful, but I was just behaving in a sinful way because I was just overcome by the emotion of not having a relationship with him. And so my relationship with other people suffered. I mean, I could tell you all the good, bad, and ugly, but then you think that I was a really bad human being.
Whatever.
But seriously, when we are outside of intimacy with God, then we fall into those traps of gossip. We fall into those traps of unrighteous anger and things like that, And so even if, because of your foundation of relationship with him, even if the things that you are, let's say, having an opinion about, or that you feel strongly about are your foundation is good, your response is not when you're outside of intimacy with him. So I could have a whole conversation about politics on that one.
That's exactly what I was thinking about as you were talking.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just like the more I grow in relationship with him, the more I recognize that we are each so uniquely called to a specific purpose for him, that anytime we step outside a relationship with him, we fall into the patterns of the world. That's why we're not supposed to be conformed to the patterns of this world. We're supposed to be transformed by constant relationship and renewing of our mind, because there is no one else in the history of the world that ever had the plan that God has for you.
Yeah, so good. So making this transition to not being in the bakery as much,
mm-hmm.
What has that opened up for you? Like, what's God in the middle of with you that this space was even required for you to walk into?
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and it is really blowing my mind right now, and literally like every time I get alone with him, he reveals something new about it, or just a new chapter, if you will, is I'm writing the next book. And what he told me regarding, we actually might have talked about this very briefly in September. And I was like, I don't even know what this looks like, But at one moment in my prayer time, he told me that the first book was basically, I needed you to learn that. That was kindergarten. And so now I want to talk to you about a debt-free life. And golly, I don't want to ruin anything by giving too much information away right now, especially when I don't even know the fullness of it. But what he's starting to show me is how we, through tradition and good intentions in the body of Christ, have passed on what we consider to be manners and good behavior. And even though our intentions have been the best, and again, this comes to when you're not in intimacy with Holy Spirit, you do things that that had good foundation and good intentions, but we veer the slightest away from God, and it's not God, right? Just showing us how in the body of believers that we have taken on traditions and things that are just the slightest bit away from what God's intention for us was. And what that does is it causes us to be in slavery to one thing or another.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a little bit too much of a tease and not enough information, but I don't want to speak out of turn by, I'm just in this incredible, I have like 350 references in scripture that he's given me, because he told me do this word search and this word search, and I'm just working my way through it. But then there'll be other times, and this is, if I weren't in the place that he wants me to be and free to hear what he's saying to me, this wouldn't happen. But for example, I was driving to, we're visiting my family. I wouldn't have been here Sunday, except that I'm not full-time in the bakery anymore. And so I had the freedom to stay in New York when my husband went back.
Yeah.
So I got to have an extended vacation, except for it's working time with the Lord. I'm driving to church with my parents, and he drops this whole entire, it's a chapter of a book, but it's a whole sermon about how we behave as believers and as polite society regarding forgiveness and Romans 14, and how that applies to how we operate in forgiveness. I'm just blown away by what he's doing. So he's doing that.
So you're writing with your Holy Ghost writer.
Oh my word. Yes. And in a way I've never done it before, which is really super exciting.
Yeah.
But he's also like, so there's that. He's also, put a heart on me to help other entrepreneurs grow up, new entrepreneurs and people who want to live in a debt-free way. And so that assignment on my life is in the process. I get to do that, with mentoring in KDE, but then also I'm working through that as a coach and an advisor and mentor. And so there's that. But then something else really cool is that he's allowing me to see more of him and his special things. I just have to tell this because I have to tell somebody. I'm guessing somebody listening to this podcast is going to understand just the enormity of how amazing this was. But visiting my parents in the Adirondacks, as I mentioned, my dad and I go out on the lake to go fishing, as we like to do on any nice night when we're able to. So we're on the boat in the lake, and we're going along the shoreline, where the good big bass are. And we hear commotion and see a duck fly. And so I look to where the duck was, because what would have startled a duck to fly like that? And we see two little black bear cubs running up the hill beside the lake. And just for some perspective, my dad hasn't seen one since they've been back to the Adirondacks. They're very elusive and very shy. So, and I've never seen one in the wild, a black bear at all. I've only seen them, at the dump, and that's not real. That's not natural. But so we see these two bear cubs running away, and that in and of itself was just amazing. And I just felt like God was giving me such a special gift. And but then we go a little bit further down, and we see this family of otters. And I never would have experienced those things. And just every little thing like that is just this kiss and a hug for my daddy God, And I never would have gotten to experience those things if I had been focused on, well, I got to get back and be in that place. So, which he told me to be released from. So he's just really good stuff right now.
You're in a wonderful part of the adventure. Every part's been wonderful in its own way, because God's been in the midst of all of it from day one and all of this stuff. But you said something I thought that was really important, which was that how God in his grace will, allow us to work through some of this tough stuff as we're learning something that's important for us to be able to walk out the fullness of what he has, for us. And then when it's like, okay, it's time. You're like, it's time to grow up in this now. So I'm going to make this a little bit more uncomfortable. I'm going to make this a little, what felt like grace grace-filled time before. It's not going to feel very grace-filled right now. And you're going to feel that shaking because it's time for us to shift. Right. And I think that was an important thing for you to share, because I know that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And I think sometimes when going through that, people may mistake that for something else, like mistake that for, oh, this is an attempt of the enemy, or this is the attack of the enemy. It's like, no, it's not an attack of the enemy. Like, God's doing something here.
Yeah,
God's
we have to be able to recognize the difference between discomfort and chaos.
Yes.
Because God allows us into discomfort, but he's not a God of chaos. And so I think that's a big distinction there, because oftentimes he'll put us in discomfort, and so that we can experience, when we experience a discomfort, we look for a shift and change, and then we're teachable, right? But then when we get into chaos, that's when God has to swoop in and rescue us, because we let it go for too far. And he's not a God of chaos; he's a God of peace.
Yeah.
So anyway,
so
I think that's the big distinction of how you tell a difference between those two different seasons. You know, when it's gone too far, and you like, okay.
So good. Okay, Alicia, thank you for sharing the update of like the last 9 months. It's super good. Continue to enjoy level 2.0, Grace Over Grind level 2.0. We can't wait to see the fruit of what God's working out in you and speaking to you about for the next book that's going to be coming out. And it's just going to be pretty awesome. So where do people who want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to go?
So, you know what? I just give you my email address. I love connecting with people. My email address is cake, whimsy, WHIMZY @gmail.com. I have 2 websites. I have one for the consulting and coaching business and the other one for the bakery, but both of them are under construction. So I just hate to give it out right now because I don't want you to get there and then there's nothing there. So
that's fair. That's fair. Well, thanks, Alicia, for sharing. Appreciate you and love you.
Thank you.
I absolutely love having these update conversations on the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur podcast, because it allows us to just experience more of what the journey is over time as we're growing and thriving and doing business in partnership with God. So absolutely loved this conversation that I had with my dear sister, Alicia. And I have now with me my dear husband, Mr. Bynes, our CEO of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. How's it going, babe?
It's well, my love.
Good. All right. So what are takeaways for today, sir?
Okay. My first takeaway is Alicia said that if you have a need to control, that's an indication that something is controlling you. You made something an idol. That same thing that you have the need to control. And quite frankly, I think it's very true. You know, in this world, there is no such thing as us truly having control. And so this ideal of us controlling things is a fallacy anyways.
That's true.
The only one that knows all and sees all is God. He's the only one that has the possibility of controlling things. And so, you know, we don't really control things. So, yeah, that's good. The second thing I have is, you know, you're surrendering. When you surrender things, especially things that you have poured into, specifically, we're talking about employees right now, employees that you have poured into, you surrendered responsibility over to them. A lot of times that's when they finally get a chance to flourish, right? Because as long as you're giving them, they'll continue to eat. But once you've released them to walk and operate in the things that you've already imparted in them, then they can show forth what you have already placed in them. They begin to shine.
Yeah, that's so good. And so in that key word around that was the surrender part, which is trusting. It's like you're trusting God, and you're also trusting that what God's given you to impart and release into them, that there will be fruit from that, you know? And sometimes we don't get to experience that unless we take a step back. Sometimes we can be too engaged. We don't want to be disengaged, obviously, but sometimes we can be more engaged and leadership positions as CEOs or whatever the leadership position might be, than is called for in the season. And so we have to be able to surrender and give that space and allow the Lord to move and allow ourselves to be able to see the fruit of what God's doing and the gifts that he has given us in staff. And so that's super good. I love that one.
Yeah. And the last one I have here is, if you hold too tightly to your traditions, they can cause you to go off into bondage. And so the way that looks for me is like, a lot of times we do things because this is how we've always done them. But if we do things just because that's the way we always done them, God says, behold, I do a new thing. Well, there's no space for a new thing ever. And so that's how your traditions can actually hold you into bondage. So I thought that was very good.
Yeah, that's good. I love it. Good stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to inviting Alicia to come back maybe in another year. It's just fun to kind of watch how things develop as we walk this adventure out with God, as we steward the things that he places before us, as we keep our posture as a yes, God, as we go along the way. It's so wonderful to see how he continues to increase, to expand, to elevate, to just provide more opportunity to go deeper with him and to be able to have, greater impact with the folks that, that are in your sphere of influence. And so looking forward to having her back again in the future. And I guess, let's see, it's early August 4th. And so we have some pretty exciting things coming up with Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur over the next few weeks. I think we've teed up some information about one of them already. We have Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Advisory Services that's about to be opened, as well as our Kingdom Catalyst program. So those are going to be coming up. You'll be getting more information about that soon. Make sure you're on our email list so that you don't miss what's going on in the big picture of all things Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. You can do that at kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com/connect. And also, here's a save the date, October 8th and 9th. We're going to be doing the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur live, except it won't be live face-to-face in person. It'll be live virtually. So we look forward to hanging out with Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur family from all around the globe, October 8th and 9th. We'll be opening up registration for that pretty soon. So just keep an eye out for that. You can save the date for now, but just stay tuned. We have more information coming out over these next few weeks. So again, kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com/connect to make sure you are on our email list and don't miss a thing. Mr. Bynes, anything that you need to add before we hop off?
No. If anything that I add would be before, it would be premature. So.
Okay, very good. So you're going to hold your peace, and we'll talk to you more next week on the next episode of the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Thanks for joining us on the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we encourage you to subscribe and spread the word. And don't forget, you can gain access to even more resources, plus a thriving community of fire starters by visiting our website at kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com.